China has said that they will, in fact, lift the export controls on rare earth minerals for 1 year. So the U.S. is on like a 1 year probation, a conditional probation. They have to constantly check in with their parole officer, China, and make sure that they're not violating the terms of the agreement. Trump got absolutely dog-walked in South Korea by Xi Jinping. Chairman, Secretary General Xi Jinping. He absolutely destroyed Donald Trump. I'm not one of these guys that will sit here and say, let's analyze the body language of the leaders of, these countries. But let's be real. The body language of Xi Jinping's handshake first meeting with Donald Trump since 2019, icy. That was icy.
Mr. President, the President of the People's Republic of China.
Okay, they shake hands.
Great pleasure to see you again.
Good to see you again.
Me too.
And we're going to have a very successful meeting, I have no doubt.
She's just thinking like, oh shit. 2 hours of this. Oh God, 2 hours of this. Okay.
But he's a very tough negotiator. That's not good. We know each other well.
Mr. President, do you plan to sign a trade deal today?
Could be. I think we'll have a great understanding.
Cue the Curb Your Enthusiasm theme song. They didn't sign the deal that day.
We have a great relationship. We've always had a great relationship.
I don't know. That just doesn't seem like the face of a guy that's happy to see Trump. It looks like he's, at the very least, mildly irritated by his presence and that he has to even participate in a meeting of this kind with Donald Trump. Now, let's actually talk about what took place at this meeting, okay? For starters, as a general principle that we can look to and a pattern that we can look to in this trade war, everything that China has done or not done or revoked has been conditional upon U.S. action. So if the U.S. will say, okay, well, we're gonna stop this behavior, then China will say, okay, well, if you're gonna stop and you're serious about it this time, then we will reverse this policy of ours. That's how this whole thing has operated, and that's how it's going to continue to operate for the foreseeable future. Because what actually took place today in South Korea was not a trade deal being signed. There were loose understandings in some cases, strong understandings in other cases about other agreements and specifics about these discussion points. But the only guarantee that we have thus far, you can call it a guarantee, China has said that they will, in fact, lift the export controls on rare earth minerals for 1 year. So the U.S. is on like a 1 year probation, a conditional probation. They have to constantly check in with their parole officer, China, and make sure that they're not violating the terms of the agreement. But the agreement is that, well, the one thing that really pissed China off with this whole deal was the United States said that they were going to place specialized tariffs and fees on Chinese-made ships that were docking at U.S. ports. There's no national security threat. There's no real threat, economic threat to having Chinese ships dock at U.S. ports as they are doing their routine trade routes. This is just a direct attack on Chinese shipping, the Chinese shipping industry, which is now one of the largest ship producers in the world. Obviously, the Chinese shipbuilding, there's like a giant Chinese shipbuilding parent company. It is a state-owned enterprise in China, and they not only produce these commercial vessels, civilian vessels, they also are producing the military vessels and a great number of aircraft carriers, as well as other destroyers, things of this nature, equivalents of what the U.S. Navy has. China has created the second blue water navy. You always hear these Pentagon stooges. They say the U.S. is the only country in the world with a blue water navy, whatever that means. Blue Water Navy. Well, no, China actually is, well, we're right up there now. And our ships, unlike China's, they fall apart in the middle of the blue water. China's ships seemingly do not have that issue of falling apart, breaking down every 3 days. So that's basically the deal here. Now, there's a few other important stats. China has said that they are going to, so the U.S. said that they're going to crack down on, they're going to stop with the fentanyl tariffs, as they called them. So the U.S. had a fentanyl tariff, and China got very upset by the fentanyl tariff because for a civilizational state, a giant power like China, to be accused by the United States of procuring and facilitating the trade of fentanyl is obviously, that's a big deal. That's a big no-no. That's a big accusation to make. So Trump has dropped the fentanyl tariffs from 20 to 10%. Now, I'll add that kind of lends credence to the argument that we and many others have been making here, that the whole idea that all these drugs are coming from Venezuela, all this fentanyl is coming from Venezuela, and the precursors, allegedly, according to the Trump administration, are coming from China, and then they end up in Venezuela, the fentanyl then comes to the United States. This kind of, it destroys the narrative that the White House has been putting out that Venezuela and China are working together on this massive, intercontinental fentanyl trade. If Trump is reducing the quote-unquote fentanyl tariffs, as he called them, insane that he would label it as such. What else do we have here? So the soybeans we'll talk about in a second, because the soybeans are a pretty funny part of this deal. The U.S. and China have agreed to properly address U.S. concerns regarding TikTok. U.S. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent noted all details are ironed out for a final transaction. So a deal was still not signed. This meeting was 1.5 hours. That's a pretty short meeting for something of this grandeur. 1.5 hours. That's pretty short. Pretty short. I mean, the Putin-Trump summit Alaska, that was like an all-day affair, basically, when you take into account that also it was not just Putin and Trump. It was their teams. It was their the parallel, officials from each country meeting throughout the day. I mean, this was an all-day affair. Obviously, bigger deal, Russia-Ukraine war, NATO proxy war, but this is interesting. 1.5 hours, very short, okay? Now, let's talk about the soybeans, because the soybeans is my favorite part. So you have Scott Bessent, the Treasury Secretary. He's going out on Fox Business with Jeanine Pirro's show, and he talks about, we took a huge victory. We were very victorious, extremely victorious. Trump is saying that on a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being the best, this was a 12 out of 10 in terms of how well this went for the United States, right? What does Scott Bessent justify? What does he cite to justify this exceptional review that he and Trump and the U.S. officials have given to this meeting? Soybean purchases from China, which are at a lower level than they were prior to the trade war. I kid you not.
Agreement, and possibly as soon as next week. And Maria, one of the big parts of this agreement, and I'm going to break the news here on your story, is the massive amount of agriculture purchases that the Chinese are going to be doing in this agreement. So the Chinese have agreed to buy 12 million metric tons of soybeans during this season, right now, between now and the should be January, and then for the next.
Okay, so 12 million metric tons between now and January, that is technically a lot. That is technically a lot. Given the fact that this trade war was going on for pretty much the whole year, though, and China has gone elsewhere, they have diversified their pool of suppliers for soybeans. Per annum, 12 million is actually below half of what China was buying before the trade deal.
Next 3 years, they're going to be buying a minimum of 25 million metric tons per annum for the next 3 years.
China has agreed to buy, what did he say, 25 million, 23 million metric tons per year of soybeans from the U.S. Before the trade deal, China was buying 29 to 32 million metric tons per year. So this is actually a decrease.
What I would expect is, as President Trump did in 2020, after President Xi had agreed to the Phase 1 deal, he called him regularly and got him to buy more, and that number went up much higher, possibly as soon as next week.
Okay, so our big victory is that there's a decrease in Chinese purchases of soybeans per year by about 5 million metric tons. And maybe if Donald Trump calls Xi Jinping and begs him enough, we can get close or closer to hitting the numbers that we were hitting before the trade deal began. China has agreed to, with the U.S., to kick the can down the road on all of these subjects for one more year. The U.S. is on probation with the rare earth mineral export restrictions. They've lifted those for a year. If the U.S. acts and behaves in a manner that is acceptable by China, then the export lifting controls will be in place for a full year. And then if anything doesn't go the way that was agreed upon in this meeting, China has the authority and the ability at that point to reimpose the export controls on rare earth minerals. Now, I just want to make a note here. The reason why the rare earth minerals are extremely important, there's many reasons why they're very important. Tungsten is possibly of the utmost importance out of all the rare earth minerals that are in question, because tungsten is what the United States and many other countries utilize heavily for their military sector, for the military industrial complex, right? And if the defense sector can't get this tungsten from China, and we're not talking about raw tungsten, we're talking about the rare earth that has been processed, it's been refined, whatever the official verbiage is for minerals. They can't get it from many other places in a cheap manner. You can get raw tungsten from other countries, sure, in Central Asia, Kazakhstan, for example, but it's raw. It's not able to be used in a quick and ready way, in a cheap way, by the United States if they were to go to Kazakhstan as their supplier of tungsten, for example. The other big issue here is that China, of course, they basically halted their exports of chips, and this really hurt the European car manufacturers, the European auto manufacturers, as you all know the story. That, if continues, could potentially spread to the United States. So we will continue to follow and see how this story develops. Right now, it's looking like Trump got absolutely crushed, and it's really not even Trump's, fault. I mean, the U.S. is just simply behind China in all of these key facilities. West is a decade behind China on rare earths, according to Goldman Sachs. It could take the West up to 10 years to challenge China's dominance of rare earths. Goldman Sachs has warned the minerals critical for most modern technology remain the center of trade disputes between Washington, the EU, and Beijing. China accounts for over 90% of global rare earth refining and 98% of all magnet production, according to data from the International Energy Agency and industry analysis. While China mines about 2/3 of the world's rare earth, it also dominates the processing and manufacturing stages that transform those materials into usable components. So basically, what I'm trying to say here is even if the U.S. doesn't want to play ball with China, it's not like the U.S. can just go somewhere else and buy a more expensive product. They're actually limited pretty much to China right now as to where they can get these rare earths that are already processed, already refined from, and that is China. So they're screwed. Donald Trump didn't even bring up the subject of Russian oil sanctions with Xi Jinping in his meeting. According to all public accounts, he did not bring that up. He also did not bring up the subject of Taiwan. I think the Chinese probably didn't bring up Taiwan, despite the fact that they have serious concerns over what the U.S. has been doing with Taiwan over the past less than 12 months of the Trump administration. But I think the Chinese simply don't care to explain themselves to the U.S. anymore about Taiwan. And we all know that Trump couldn't bring up these Russia sanctions or Taiwan to Xi Jinping because the cards are not in their favor. I mean, They're struggling as is to try and convince China to lift the rare earth export controls. Why would you think that it would be reasonable if you're Donald Trump to bring up Taiwan or these Russia sanctions? It's ludicrous. These are unilateral sanctions. They're not UN unanimous consent sanctions, anything like that. It's insane. So he didn't even bother to bring these up because he knows how ludicrous it is, and he knows that he'd be asking for way too much if he brought those subjects up.